Hello, welcome. I was live there for a little while and I hadn't noticed yet. Thanks for joining me. Today we are jumping back into the TwoWeeksReady project. If you're new to my stream, my name's Dave Paquette. I am one of the 3 Asp.Net monsters with myself, Simon Timms, and James Chambers. We like to chat about web development, cloud development, and generally in the .NET and JavaScript, TypeScript world, and we spend a lot of time working on Azure. So today what I'm diving into is an open source project that I'm helping out with the humanitarian toolbox. So the project is called TwoWeeksReady, and this is an application that's designed to help families and households in general have a plan for being ready in case of an emergency. The idea being that you should try to have, supplies ready at least to sustain yourself for 72 hours in case of an emergency, and possibly up to a couple of weeks in general. And this app is going to kind of help you to have a plan, to know where your emergency supplies are, and to help communicate that with your family. And then also have potentially some alerting that happens in case of an actual event, when an emergency event occurs. So we're in the early stages of the project, and what I'm doing, I'm working with Carrie Payette and Chris Love are both working on that, also contributing to the project. Carrie's kind of leading the way, and I'm just trying to help with getting some of the infrastructure in place. And the focus that we've been working on lately is getting integration with Auth Zero. So Auth Zero has generously provided us with one of their open source packages, allowing us to use their authentication service for our project. So I have actually gone in and I submitted a PR a little while ago, and that was just merged today by myself. Carrie told me to just go ahead and do that. I was waiting on a review, but I thought what we'd do is pull down that code, and where I'd like to get to with this project is the point where we can start to have other people come in and start contributing and start moving a little faster on the features that we're trying to build. The different infrastructure-wise or like framework-wise, what we're using to build this, the plan is for it to be a progressive web app. So it's a browser-based application built using Vue.js as the framework. So we're using Vue plus Vuetify as the UI library. And on the back end, we're doing Azure Functions. So it's a .NET Azure Functions API on the back end. And any data that we have for the application, we're going to store in Cosmos DB. And as I said, we're going to do authentication using Auth Zero. So I thought what I'd do is just kind of pull down the code locally. I want to get set up with the Cosmos DB local emulator. I believe that's a thing. Helps if you can spell. Let's just see what we need to do to download the emulator here. So installing the emulator. There's a Docker version, and there's just an app that I can download. I think I will actually just download it here. And the reason I want to get this set up is the default way that somebody who's contributing to the application will use it is I don't necessarily want people to need to know the connection strings to our Cosmos DB for our test environment. I'd rather that people are able to just run everything locally without having to spin up cloud services. So we're going to get that set up. And I made the mistake last time of when I did the stream, I showed my connection string with the Cosmos DB primary key in there, and so I had to go and cycle those keys after the stream because I didn't want to have a key that was just, out there that people had seen. Not that I think anybody would really do anything bad with it, but you never know. Better safe than sorry. So I ended up having to go cycle the keys, and that caused some issues for Carrie then because it broke the deployed version, and I didn't realize that she was working on it at the same time as I was. So let's get this set up as a first thing. And then we can see if we can just get everything running locally here. For those watching, if you're able to just let me know in the chat if my audio sounds okay this time. I know I've had some issues with audio in the past. With lots of like crackling sounds. I think I've cleared that up, but would appreciate just a quick note if that happens to be working. Okay, so I have my Cosmos DB emulator here running with a local endpoint, so I should be able to just grab this now. And that can be my connection string locally when I run this. So I think I have the latest code. Let's just make sure. Yeah. Okay, so there's two pieces to this. There's the API that we need running. And so I'm just going to pop that open in code here. And in my local app settings. Okay, so in my local settings here, for my Azure Functions, this is where I need that Cosmos DB connection, so I know what I'm dealing with. And I've specified that as my local host one now, so I can run this without having to connect to the cloud version of my service, which is good. And I think I just need to, great, my Sai says my audio sounds good. Thank you very much for the feedback on that. Okay, so now that I have that set up, let me just double check. So a quick overview of the API side of things here. Let me just bump up my font size and probably there. Hopefully that's big enough that everyone can see well. Okay, so this is split up into a couple projects here for my API. I do have a function startup defined here. So when my function app starts up, it's going to call this to configure my host builder, functions host builder, and I'm adding OIDC API authorization. Now this is some code that I borrowed from someone's GitHub repo that was an example of how to validate a bearer token in a Azure Functions API. So there's a link here if you're interested to Brian's GitHub repo where he kind of walks you through his sample code of how to do this in Azure Functions. So that's what I'm going to use on the function side to check the authorization token after somebody's logged in and then passes their access token, bearer token over to the API when they go to request data from our Azure function. Okay, so in the TwoWeeksReady project, in that folder are my actual API endpoints. And then inside of OIDC API authorization, we have basically Brian's code here that's going to go and do the OIDC checks and validate that bearer token for us. So it's going to go and just extract some information from the bearer token. We don't really need to get into the guts of how that works, but that's kind of the breakup of the project here. So there's the startup. It adds that OIDC API authorization, which grabs some information from these particular settings. So it knows that I'm looking for this audience and this issuer URL to go and validate the bearer tokens that come in. And then within the actual API endpoints, what I'm doing is I'm grabbing a Cosmos DB client as an input to my function, and then the function itself is an HTTP trigger with authorization level set to anonymous. Now, that's not to be confused with anonymous as in just anybody can hit it. It just means it's not using the Azure Functions authorization. So that's the authorization where you pass in an API key or the function key along with your request to authorize as a form of authorization into that function. But what we're doing is we're going to be managing our own authorization through this OIDC piece. So once that's, okay, so the family one isn't really done. That's a bad example. If we look at the emergency kit one, what we do here is we inject this IAPI authorization piece. That's from Brian's code, from this OIDC API authorization namespace. And from that, we're able to authorize the user by inspecting the request headers. So it's in those request headers is where the API or where the bearer token is going to be. And we'll look at the client side in a minute to see where that all gets passed in. So we go and check that and make sure that it didn't fail. So this gives us an authorization result, which is just going to have basically a Boolean saying whether or not it failed and a reason why it failed, and success is it succeeds if it didn't fail, basically. So we just check to see if it failed, and if it failed, we log that information, the reason why someone failed, and then we pass back the unauthorized result. Otherwise, we go ahead and go and query our database and grab data from the emergency kits collection. And right now, this isn't scoped to like a user at all. That's one of the things I'm hoping to do is have these emergency kits defined per user, instead of just like a global list that everybody sees everybody's emergency kits, which is definitely not the intention of the app. This was just kind of initial sample code that we were putting together. So it's the basic structure of the API. I can run this, and we'll just wait for that to spin up. Okay, so that should be, encrypted settings only editable through function settings add. Do I have an issue with my local settings here? Encrypted false. Interesting. This was working before. Okay, what's the problem here? Funchost start, it does not like. Why is that? Might just be my task here. Publish, build, host start. No, that looks right. That's annoying. Let's just try that again. I'll watch it more closely so it builds fine. Can't determine project language from files. Please use one of. Where is it running this? Doesn't tell me what folder it's running funchost start in. What happens if I go into the 2weeksReady folder and say func start? Okay, well, last time I had issues like this. It had something to do with the version of the runtime, or of the Azure Functions core tools. Let's just double check and make sure that we're running the latest. think that's the version I'm on. A little disconcerting because I tested this very recently and everything worked just fine. Not sure what would be causing it to fail now. It updated one package, but that looks like the version I was already on, so that's kind of weird. .NET build. Unco start. Oh, or my local settings are at the wrong place. So I think my problem was that I had local settings down one level from where it should have been. I'm not totally sure, so let's just try that again. We'll see if it runs now. I had it down at the root, but my actual functions project is this TwoWeeksReady folder. So success. Yes, we hit a breakpoint or something. Cool. So what I wanted to show is if I just go directly to here, I'll follow this link. So I got a 401, which is what I would expect to get, and that's because the authorization header is missing, is invalid, or is not a bearer token. And in fact, we haven't set one at all, so that's exactly what we would expect to have happen. And we'll call that a success. Now, let's bring up the rest of the project, which is the front end side of things. So I'm going to do an alt. Love this ability to split my Windows terminal in two here. I just did an alt and then, or press down alt and click new tab. Let's split my window into two. So what I can do now is say HTBox, TwoWeeksReady, and what's the folder? It's T2WR API. Nope, 2WR app. Okay, so I can have that there. Open this guy up. I'm just going to do an npm install just to make sure I have the latest install. And we'll close everything up here. So on the front end, we manage our local settings here through .env files. So I have a .env.local where I'm specifying my Auth Zero settings. So here's my domain, my client ID, and my audience. And then I also specify the API route. So this is telling it that the API, when I'm running locally here, this file we don't check in. It's just something that is set locally. I'm gonna hit the endpoint that's running here. So I can run this, but first what I want to do, let's bring over that Azure emulator that I had somewhere. This guy. And check out the Explorer. I'm going to create the database because it doesn't exist here yet. I believe we called it TWR. I'm going to bring up my functions here. So the emergency kit API talks to database named TWR, and there's a collection named emergency kits. I'm just going to create that ahead of time here. And I don't really care about throughput on a local database, but okay, so there's my database. I can create a new container. That container will be emergency kits, and I don't think we've really thought through what our partition keys are yet with these. We might partition on user ID. I will have to think about that a little bit. And there we go. Okay, so there's no data in there right now, but at least I would expect that the endpoint will get hit. Let's put a breakpoint there. So I'll put a breakpoint here. and I'm going to go and run my app. So the way I run this app locally is I run npm run serve. So there's a serve task here that runs the Vue CLI service that will build the app and set up watches and run a local development server for me. So I just go npm run serve, and that will spin up the app for me. Yes, 800 modules. Okay, so I can run this now, and there is a strange problem that the login is missing. I noticed this on the deployed version, and I wasn't sure why. There should be a app bar at the bottom here with like some login stuff. So I just have one calling me, so I'm gonna have to hit pause real quick, and I will be right back. Sorry about that, folks. I am back now. And let's dig into what's happening here. So, where were we? Okay, we have, sorry, just trying to get my bearings here after, right. Okie dokie. So there's supposed to be a little info bar at the bottom here that allows us to log in. I don't know why that's missing. So let's take a look. It's going to take me a bit to remember how this front end piece is set up. So we have an app that's the shell, and that shell has this bottom navigation here. Oh, right. So it says if not auth loading. And it's hiding that whole thing. Don't know if that's what we meant to do. I wonder if I take that off, if that solves the, well, it's not going to solve the problem because something else is definitely going on there. Okay, so that, interesting. I wonder if we should just come back to that. Let's just test the login. So if I log in, oh, maybe this is broken. Something is clearly broken with the Auth Zero piece, and that was working a little while ago. So let's start out by logging into Auth Zero. So Auth Zero. I'm going to log in here. What is up with our Auth Zero app? Let's see. So within Auth Zero, I'm fairly new to Auth Zero, so I'm just kind of learning how this stuff works. But we have an app, a single page app set up here called TwoWeeksReady. That's the one that we're configured to use. So within here, or within that environment.local, env.local, these settings should basically match what we have here. So, I mean, that looks right, as does the client ID, just from a quick scan. So that part should be fine. And then the way that we integrate with that, I just followed the Vue.js tutorial straight from inside the, actually this is kind of neat how they did this in Auth Zero. So when you go to your app, there's quick starts, and they list out for all the common library or frameworks that you might be using. You click View, and it gives you a step-by-step tutorial here on how to configure Auth Zero for your application. So the way it kind of bootstraps all of that. So first off, we pull in this Auth Zero JS library here, and then we define a plugin. Nope. I lied. So we do define a plugin, but it's under auth. So auth/index.js here. And in here we go and create a Auth Zero client. So that part is here where we call, we define a function called use Auth Zero that goes and creates a Vue instance, and that contains our authentication information in it. But there's this thing here called instance, which is returned from, right, so I'm just reminding myself as I walk through this how this was implemented. Most of this code was just copied and pasted off of that sample. But there is, somewhere in here, there's this is loading piece where we, if we're handling like the redirect back from Auth Zero, where it does the like key exchange thing that it does to get an access token after login, it sets is loading to true or false. And I have some console logs in here still that I should remove. Right, so over in main.js, when we start up the Vue app itself, we tell Vue that we want to use this Auth Zero plugin that we specified. That's where we pass in all of our information. So those app settings that the Auth Zero settings that we looked at earlier. And that's really all there is to it, so I'm confused why this stopped working. So something isn't loading properly initially. And if let's just go back to the app, which was here. And I'm going to clear this, I'm going to clear this, hit refresh. Okay, so we get a 403 here when it tries to talk to, it's trying to call authorize over with the app over on Auth Zero. Why is it giving us a 403? Oops, something went wrong. Callback URL mismatch. Provided redirect URI. Okay. So if we go to our application settings page, oh, interesting. Why is it running on 8002? That's strange. Okay, so this is a little bit weird. Usually it starts up at 8081, but for some reason that port must be in use. So it's just incremented it by 1, and my local app is using that. So a couple of things that I'm going to fix here. So if we go to 2weeksready to wrdev, so this is our test instance up in the cloud of the app. And I was having the same issue here, and it's obvious to me now that I just need to go in here and add that URL to one of the allowed callbacks and allowed origins, and what's it saying here? Web origins must be a valid URI. Oh, a comma separated list. Okay, not what I was expecting. Funny how every service does this just slightly differently. I've been dealing with, in the last month, I've been dealing with Azure B2C, Azure B2C, Okta, and Auth Zero, sometimes all on the same day. So it's good fun. Okay, so adding that in, if I save the changes, should probably fix the problem on this page. I'm hoping, although it may take a little while for that to happen. So it made the call and it failed again. And what did it fail with this time? name not resolved? Oh, undefined. Okay, so that's a different error, different issue. We'll come back to the deployed version. I think that's an issue with the environment settings there. But let's go, and we're also going to add, just for those of us who end up in this scenario, we're going to also allow 8082 as a port here for all of these. Kind of hard to read as a comma-separated list. Would have been nice to have those as new lines instead. Okay, let's see how quickly that worked. Provided request redirect URI is not in the list of allowed callback URLs. Well, that's the same issue we had before. It's possible it just takes a minute for this to get applied. So what is my redirect URI that it's giving it? It is, I guess it would just be whatever the current address is. I don't know if I need that trailing slash. And I shouldn't, but I had it there for the other one, so I might as well put it in. Oh, I missed the changing it to a 2. That's probably my problem. This time for sure, right? Yes, I got a 200 back there. Okay, so now I suspect that I can undo the change I had here. So for some reason I'm hiding this toolbar when the authentication stuff is just loading, which is when it's making that initial call. I don't know why I was doing that. We'll come back and revisit that later. But I think that now when I refresh, login thing comes up. I hit login, takes me to this page that we've customized. We'll have to customize it a little more because this looks weird to say to log into blah. But you can come in here, you can sign in with Google, or you can go and sign up and create an account for the TwoWeeksReady app. I've already done that, so I can just log in here. And it does not like my password, which is weird. There we go. Okay, so now that I'm logged in, you'll notice that I have different options here. I can go into emergency kits, and in theory, this will make a call to my backend. And is that still running? I do still have it running, and I had set some breakpoints, but it looks like maybe it didn't make the call that I was expecting it to make. So what happened this time? Oh, 404 not found. Right, so that's an easy fix. My environment local settings are not quite right. That's weird. So my API route is 7071/API, which is correct. That's what my Azure Functions is running on here locally. But for some reason, when I look at here, it says it just tried to get it from 7071/emergency kit, so it's missing that /API. That's a little strange. Let's go have a look at why it's doing that. So my base URL it's grabbing from the environment variables, API root. We, from our auth instance, get a token. So that is part of the Auth Zero JavaScript libraries. It's going to go and request a token. It's going to try to get it from local, I think they cache it in local storage first, and if it's not expired, it's going to use that access token that it got. Otherwise, if it's about to expire or is expired, it will actually go out and use a refresh token it has to go and request a new token for you silently in the background without prompting the user to have to go and log back in. If that doesn't work, then it will send the user to go log in. But we're just grabbing that token and then setting that as a bearer token for anything that we send out to the API. But I'm extremely confused why that URL is incorrect. So if we come in here to, so we're saying get emergency kit. So what's going on here with my options? So base URL is API. It got my authentication token, but then it's trying to get it from completely the wrong place. That is super weird. Okay, what's going on here? So it's using this red Axios library to do, which is a version, or I don't know if it's a fork of Axios, but one that uses the fetch APIs instead of using the like the standard AJAX kind of XML HTTP request. And we're doing that because we want this to be a PWA, a progressive web app that has a service worker that can intercept and cache network requests. So that we can work offline, because the idea is in case of an emergency, the networks might be down entirely or completely overloaded. We don't want to have to rely on making an API call to get data. We'll want to be storing things like the location of their emergency kits and any other important information that the users need in case of an emergency. We'll want that to be stored locally on their device. So we'll want to be grabbing that from that cache instead. But that has nothing to do with why this isn't working, I don't think. We're saying that the base URL for this API instance is, oh, wait a minute. What did it say it was calling? Yeah, no, localhost 7070. We get the instance, which is saying, oh, right. So there's this, no, that's not what I was looking for. Base API instance has a method called getInstance that returns axios.create with a list of options. That options has a base URL, which we've confirmed has the /API in it. What is going on that's stripping it of the /API part? So it's weird that this would probably work if I said API/. Yeah, that's super weird. I don't quite understand why that is, but here we are inside of our Azure Functions API now. And we can see that I could probably inspect my request here, and I could see that there are headers on it, and that one of those would be a authorization header somewhere. There are 13 headers in total, and here it is. There's my bearer token that we would expect to see. And then we can actually, if we wanted to, step into that authorization code, see how that all works. I'm just going to step over it. I hit F10 here, and we can see that it in fact succeeded. So it's going to go ahead and query my list of emergency kits and return those to the client. So that appears to have worked. We have the call here that happened and returned should be just an empty array. So let's just go put some data in my local instance here. I think there's a data explorer with that local emulator. So I should be able to come in here and say new item. And what do these things look like? An emergency kit has an ID, a name, and a color. So it's definitely just kind of a placeholder thing, but name, and this has to be valid JSON. That has to have a thing on it, and I'm just going to grab a GUID, new GUID for that ID. Kind of a weird way to generate a GUID, but here we are. Okay, so I'll upload that. Nope, I will save that. So now my collection has this one emergency kit in it, and if I come back here and refresh, actually there's a weird thing there, issue there. But in theory, let's just get rid of these breakpoints so that that runs through on its own. There is a emergency kit with a color that did not work properly. Red is not something that it likes. Oh, we're setting the color of the card based on the data. Okay. What's a color that I can use? What's this? I bet you this guy has a color, deep orange. I bet if I change it to deep orange, it will work just fine. Yeah. Is it the same color? Looks different. Anyway, so that's pulling data from my local Cosmos DB. Didn't have to connect to the cloud at all with that. We have this running again. I really need to dig into this issue though of why we need to add the API piece to it again. So my environment settings say API slash. I wonder if I need a trailing slash on it, if that's all it was. If that works, then I'd expect this to start giving me a 404 again when I come in here. Oh, you know what? There's most things auto refresh with Vue, but not the env stuff because that gets set up as like environment variables before the node process starts for the dev server. So when you make changes to these types of settings, you actually have to stop the local server and then rerun it again. Yeah, that's what it was. So for some reason, without that trailing slash, it was just removing the tail end of the base URI. Do not quite understand the logic there, but that's important to note. So all of these things that I'm running into, my plan is to document that in the readmes so that it's really easy for people to get started. So I'm going to fix that right now in here so that we don't run into that issue. And what was the other piece we needed to... Yeah, that's the main one for now. Okay. Well, I'm glad we got that resolved. So I no longer need the API prefix on here. and this should work properly. Cool. Okay, so this is one of the main things that I wanted to fix today is this weird issue that I'm running into, and it kind of has to do with how the whole Vue app is integrating with Auth Zero. And when I refresh the page, so this works fine if I come in here, I refresh the page, everything kind of initializes properly, I hit emergency kits and it works. It's able to go and call that get token piece, it gets the bearer token, it passes it through to the API, everything works fine. What doesn't work is when I click refresh here, I end up with this no data available, and then you can see that this error is getting logged in the console saying that cannot read property get token silently of null. So there's like a weird kind of order of operations thing that's going on here with how everything gets bootstrapped that I'd like to fix if possible. I don't know if we'll get there today, but we can give it a shot. So let's go back to this base API instance. I'm going to get rid of my console login here because I shouldn't be logging stuff unnecessarily into especially things with tokens in it. But so the problem is that so when it gets to that page, it's immediately trying to, I guess we should go look at the page to see why that happens, but emergency kit listing view has this emergency list kit in it, which is a component under prepare. Okay, so this is the thing that's iterating or displaying that list of emergency kits. And what it's doing is when the component is created, it's calling store.dispatch emergency kit store get emergency kit list async. So it's doing that immediately as soon as the page loads, and that's before any of the auth stuff is initialized. So when the page loads, it needs to go and load up that whole auth plugin that we were talking about earlier. So we need a way to delay that until after that has happened. And how can we do that? How would we do that? So we're using Vuex here, and we're dispatching a action. Vuex is a state management library for Vue, and that's under store. So it's this guy here. So this is an asynchronous action, and it has a check in here that says root state.globalstore.online. If we're online, grab it from the online version, otherwise grab it from local cache. So that's good. We're using local forage for that, which is a library that does local storage of caching things. But how can we basically want to delay this call until after the authentication stuff has been initialized in the case when we're online. So if we're online, I wonder. Let's take a look at that code again for how this gets bootstrapped. So we're calling get auth instance, and instance is null, but where does instance get set? When we call use Auth Zero, if there's an instance created, it does that. Otherwise, it creates a new instance. It's happening before this gets called. I basically want to make sure that this gets called before anything else happens. So where does this get called? Use Auth Zero as a function, which we are calling in here. Well, that view calls indirectly, I suppose. $auth is set to use Auth Zero with the options. Is there a callback? Because I could just do, so going back to here, I could just do if dollar this dot dollar auth. Actually, what is dot dollar auth when I get in here? So that should be that plugin object. There's my Auth Zero client. So it is there, which is interesting. Given that that's been created, I'm actually surprised that I'm hitting this null reference here on the Auth Zero client thing. Oh, that's where I'm getting the... Yeah, I thought it was somewhere else. Well, this is fun. Okay, this .auth dot is loading. What does that give us? Undefined. Oh, that's the wrong. It's just called loading, I believe. Loading true. Loading false. So probably what we should do is say, I mean, I could do if not loading, but I don't like that. For a couple of reasons. One of the reasons being it's never going to actually go and do the work, do the thing that we wanted it to do. We want it to go and get that information once the auth stuff is loaded. And that's not going to happen here now because we added this if statement and it wasn't loaded at that time. The other thing is that I don't think it's ever going to be loaded if the app's actually offline. and we do want to support that scenario. When the app is offline, we still want it to come in here and load whatever you have locally, so it's like not going to get where we need it to. So I wonder if there is a way. How are we going to do this? How indeed. So here we have this concept of setting the online status in the global store. And I wonder if there's something, if we need to do something similar with the auth status. Just that, is loaded part. If we need to do that here. Or I'm also going to Google Auth Zero Vue.js. Wait for loading. Hey, we're not the first people to come across this problem, which is pretty much always the case, isn't it? I have a Vue app. Done with the quick starter, everything works fine until I hit refresh. And then I get this cannot read this is exactly the problem. Interesting. Okay, so what they do is they say this is going to take a little while to wrap my head around the solution they came up with and how it can fit into our code here. Just going to scroll through and see what people came up with. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. I actually don't mind that solution. So here, let's take a look at, I'm going to see if I can find where that maps to the code I pulled in with the sample. So here they're saying when creating this Auth Zero client, right? So this .Auth Zero client This is an interesting solution. Write out the code and then we'll see if I can make sense of it and talk our way through what's happening here. But by doing the await, we were basically doing instead of having the promise there, we're just saying, give me the result of the promise, the thing that it resolved with. Here what I'm going to do is actually keep track of the promise. So up here in this instance, where is this thing? Where is Auth Zero client defined? Well, there is no implementation of it. So Auth Zero client and is just a property on this thing, the plugin that we're creating, which is accessible from .auth, which was this thing here, so the $auth. Right, so I think that we can actually call that good to go. And then here now, instead of get auth instance.get token silently, I wonder if I can actually say, get token silently. Yeah, that is a promise already, the thing that it returns, because it's something I'm awaiting. I can actually say dot Auth0 client promise. I have no idea if this is going to work. But the idea is when I call that get token silently, instead of immediately calling against the Auth0 client, which might not have been created yet because that promise didn't resolve, I'm going to say wait for that promise to resolve and then use the client and get the token silently. I think that might resolve the problem that we were running into. Let's give it a go. Okay, so when I look at this guy, I took out the if statement, I think. No, not there. The view. So I'm just dispatching that call again, which is going to call the API. And when the API goes to ask for a token, it's hopefully going to wait for that initialization piece to resolve before actually making the call. Let's see what happens. Doesn't look like it did. That did not work. Auth Zero client promise is not a function. Okay, I don't think I wrote that code right. Right, so it's .then is what I meant to write. So we're saying that promise that we kept a reference to when we initialize this thing, when it resolves, then use the client that it resolved with to get the token. And most of the time after that initial first load, that promise will have been resolved already, so it's just immediately going to go to the .then part here with the resolved client. Let's see what... Ooh, that looks promising actually. That worked. And I like that because it worked right away. And I think it's just going to work with the whole offline-online thing, because the way we have our Vuex store set up, if we're offline, it's just going to go to that local storage, local forage piece and grab the data. If we're online, then it's going to go and grab it from the API, and it looks like now it's waiting properly for things to resolve. So I think that actually I should probably change this everywhere to follow this approach. So everywhere inside of this plugin that we created, because these things, I believe they all return promises. It's probably best if we do it this way just to be safe and make sure that we don't run into that issue where we're trying to call it before it's done initializing. So I think that should be safe, and that's actually quite a good little solution. I don't think we need to do it here because here we're handling the redirect, and at that point it should already be done. The promise should have resolved, if I'm understanding it correctly, but I think this is a workable solution. Let's just test out a little bit here. I'm going to go back here. Does logout still work? It looks like it does. Login works. This works. It works when I hit refresh. And I think that now I'm remembering that the reason I had to put this check if it was loading here was because I was running into this issue where I was getting that null issue when the page loaded. So let's just have a look here. So yeah, that actually works now. And when I log out, yeah, cool. So that solves that problem. Solved a few problems actually. Cool. What's happening over here? Okay, so we fixed some things. I need to go and edit. I think one of the things that I'm going to try to do, probably won't get to it tonight, but I would like to go and kind of document the setup pieces that are needed to get the Azure Functions running. So specifically these OIDC settings and the Cosmos DB connection, and where to download the local emulator, how to set it up, and what to configure in it. I'd like to have that all within the README here. And that's just kind of, there's a few pieces that are missing. I'll come back to that though. What I want to do is create a pull request here with these changes to the front end. So let's just do a quick review. We remove that is loading if check on the front end, on the main page. Inside of main.js, there's only white space differences, so I'm actually going to undo that. And with the base API instance, again, there's only white space changes, so I'm going to undo. Here we've made these changes with the client promise, the Auth Zero client promise, and on the emergency list, again, just white space changes. So really that's all it took, the whole fix that took us an hour to get to was around that. But I think this is going to work. It'll obviously take a little more testing to know for sure, but I think this solves my main concerns with this integration, was around how to, that problem where when I was hitting refresh on a like route within the page, it was trying to access things before it was initialized. So Auth Zero client. Okay, I just remembered that I'm directly on master here, so I'm going to create a branch. Okay, so now I can do Usually I do this from the command line. I don't know why I'm doing it from here right now. Okay, I'll push that up, publish that branch, and then we'll switch on over to GitHub. Gonna give that a good old thumbs up, which I can't do because I'm not logged in. That's fine. GitHub. Apparently I can't spell, but that's not new. That's not news. I knew that already. Okay, so this is going to kick off our CI/CD pipeline, or GitHub Actions. What that does within the pull request is it's just going to do the build. It doesn't do the deployment to our dev environment. But I'm hoping I can actually get the dev environment working here tonight too. So let's just quickly review this pull request. Normally I'd wait for somebody to review it, but we're in early stages, and it just takes a little bit too long sometimes right now to get those reviews. So I'm actually just going to wait for the build, and once the build is good, we'll go ahead and push that in, or merge the PR. Let's take a look at the process here. So what we're doing within the build is we'll look at the YAML file for it. Okay, so that's succeeded. You'll see that it skips the Azure login and Azure deploy resources steps of the build process here when it's a pull request build. We'll look at the YAML file in a minute to see that, but this looks good now. So I'm just going to go ahead and merge the pull request. And that'll kick off a second build where it's actually going to go build it and push the changes, or deploy the changes up into Azure. And we might as well just go have a look at Azure while we're at it, and so that you can see what's in there. I'm just going to get logged in with the right credentials and the right subscription, then I'll pull it back over and onto the page. Oh, I'm already there, so that's fine. Okay, so we have a 2weeksReady resource group here that has all the resources for the app. There's a function app that hosts the API, that's the T2WR dev. And if I click on that, I can actually see those functions. There's the emergency kits and the family member one, kind of the placeholders that we have right now. And then within the app settings configuration for it is where we would actually have the things like the connection string here for our Cosmos DB, and we have the Auth Zero setting, or the OIDC settings pointing it to Auth Zero for validating those tokens. So that's the Azure Functions side. For hosting the front end of the app, that's done using Azure. So it's a storage account, and within that storage account we have static websites turned on. So we have that enabled, and it just points you to index.html if you go there. And what that does when you enable static websites is it just creates a very simple container here, $web, that has all of your, basically the assets that were the output of your build when you built your Vue app. And then it's sitting in front of that, we have, so when you do that, when you have the static websites, it exposes a URL here that is your blob storage endpoint, but you don't usually want to serve directly from that because it will probably be a little slow and probably a little expensive serving out all your web traffic directly from a storage account. Not too sure about expensive, but definitely slow. So what you do is you throw a CDN in front of it. So we have a CDN here with an endpoint, and that endpoint has an origin that's configured to be the that static website, storage static website host name that we just looked at. So that's kind of how it's all configured. And then what you're able to do is just hit that CDN endpoint and it takes you directly to the app that we just built. So this is all, should be all done now. And shortly we'll look at that GitHub Actions file. So this is the action that ran when we merged the PR, and this time it actually went and logged into Azure and deployed the files. And to deploy the files, it actually just does a batch upload of all the files from our dist folder, which is the output from doing the view build, and it copies that all over into Azure Storage for us, and then the rest just kind of Azure takes it from there, and it eventually makes its way up to the CDN. But let's just take a look at that YAML file, because I was just going based on memory. It was a while ago that I wrote this. So the steps that we're doing here, what happens if I go edit? Okay, that brings me to the UI. So what we're doing is we do an npm CI, and then we write this environment variable. And I feel like that's where the problem is. Oh, and to do the deployment, it calls this, I did these as bash scripts just so that I can also run them locally if I need to. But we're doing deploy frontend.sh, and we're telling it to deploy that folder. So I should be able to just bring that up over here somewhere. But, give me 1 second while I get to the right folder. That's not the right one. Okay, so I have these AZ scripts defined here. Just wanted to show you how it does the deployment of the front end piece. So we use the AZ CLI. There's a few options that we can pass in: the resource group name, the environment name, prefix, and the source folder. So that's telling what it's going to deploy. We just call AZ storage blob upload batch, and we tell it to upload that entire source folder, the dist folder, to the container named web. And then the last thing I do, because I don't want to wait a week sometimes for my CDN stuff to update, I call at AZ CDN endpoint purge. And I purge just, there isn't actually a lot that we need to purge when it comes to a view app. There's the index HTML, and then I probably need to do manifest.json and a couple other things, but those might not be necessary. I probably need to do those. The main thing is the index HTML, because that's the one that points to all the newly generated assets, the JavaScript files and the CSS files and whatever else that we need to reference. Those all end up being, they have a version hash on them, so they're always unique. And that's a version of cache busting those assets. So the index.html, as long as we purge that one, it references the new JavaScript assets that we need to download that all have those version hashes in them and are unique. So we're not dealing with JavaScript files that have been cached and needing to invalidate those. It's really just the index.html is the main thing that we need to invalidate. So that seems fine. The thing that I think is not quite working on the deployed app, let's just refresh that again. What's going on here? Okay, so I think that there is an issue, right? So this is zoomed in a little bit too far now. When we click here, we see that it's trying to go to undefined/authorize. So it tells me that some of those view app settings that it's trying to load aren't there. Now, we're not checking in a .env file that it's using. Oh, I'm in the wrong app. this one. We're not checking in a .env file. It needs one that basically looks like this, but is configured for the deployed version. And it doesn't have that. Something's not right there. And it looks like this domain piece isn't there. So I'm going to see if I can figure out why that is. And I think the best way for me to get at that is going to be, if we look at this last build that happened. So the way I'm writing out that env file is from a secret that's defined here inside of the GitHub repo. I'm trying to just write out that whole thing into the file name .env and then calling build, and it's going to use that .env file when it does the build. So let's just go have a look at, I think that I can look at that last build and see what it built, although I'm not sure that I actually uploaded that as an artifact. I did not. Shoot. Where would I be able to find this? It would be in, actually, I can probably, no. What is going to be the best way to solve this problem? Diagnose this problem, I suppose. I really want to see what that .env file is. But normally we don't want to be able to see what that env file is. It's really just for debugging purposes that I need to see it. So, what's this complaining about? Oh, it's just a warning. Well, what if I just echo it out? Well, that's what I'm doing. GitHub create file, GitHub actions create file. So there is a create file action. This might work better than what I was trying to do there. Let's see what other options we have. How can I save a secret to a file? That's exactly what I'm trying to do. What is this doing? GitHub Actions should be able to write a secret to a file this way. The reason you are seeing stars is that the log is filtered. So if a secret would be logged, it's replaced in the log of 3. Okay. Security measure makes sense. However, it's a good idea to avoid writing secrets to a file to log. Anyway, if possible, you can write your command like this so you don't write. So you don't write the secret to the log. Okay, that's interesting. Don't totally understand what that's doing. All you see in the log is echo SSH key, not the secret or any asterisks. Yeah, I think that might be the piece I'm missing. I was like halfway there. note that you do want quotes here since the character is special to YAML. Okay. This might fix it. It looks like probably my code was just wrong here, so we're saying I want to do run YAML. You are the worst. Just going to commit that straight to master because why not? So that $.env is a secret that's defined over here under settings. We have a secret called dev.env, and that is basically just like this copied in, but with the API route pointing to the actual deployed version. So we'll just wait for this to build, and hopefully we'll have a working version where we can log in to the app in the deployed version, which I think that the folks who we're building this for are going to be really happy if we can get to that point today. So fingers crossed. Does that not run? These don't run for some reason when I commit just a change to the YAML file. I don't know why that is. But I added this workflow dispatch so that I can force it to run manually. Kind of annoying. But this should run with the new code now. And hopefully it doesn't take too long. Use node, run npm CI. Almost there. Thanks for following along with me today. If you're interested in the project, please do watch, and hopefully we'll be ready soon for more folks to jump in and start implementing features. The thing that I wanted to get to today, didn't get there, was the idea of adding, like scoping all of that data, like things like emergency kits, to a particular user. But we'll get there next time now that we have I think that Auth Zero plugin that we're using in the View app is in a better place now, in that it doesn't crash in certain scenarios, so I think that'll be in a better place. Okay, we have built and we are deploying the app. Just reasonably quick. 18 seconds for npm CI is really not bad. Must be doing some fancy caching there. I am going to do a happy dance if this works. Here we go. Okay, so When it runs that purge at the end, we do a no wait because the purge itself actually does take a while, but I don't want my GitHub Actions to, like my pipeline, to just sit there and wait for the purge to actually happen on the CDN. So even though this is deployed, if I go and hit refresh, I'm probably not going to get the latest code just yet. It does take a little while for things to still purge, even though we're explicitly telling it to purge. Takes some time, but it takes a lot less than 7 days or whatever the default time to live is on files on the CDN. So that was just me trying to stall before I come and hit refresh. And let's see what happens now. Still going to the wrong place. Still the wrong place. Still the wrong place. I wonder if there's anything that tells me about the purges that are in progress. Did I already close Azure portal? I think I did. Oh, here it is. Oh, where's the purge? Oh, cool. It does show me the status. So the purge was accepted. It is not in the succeeded state yet. Cool, that's kind of neat. But you can see why I don't want my build sitting there for 2 minutes waiting for that purge to complete. But it does lead to a little bit of confusion because it looks like my build succeeded and it deployed. But I have to wait a little bit for the CDN to purge what it had cached up there for the index HTML. So I'll sit here and wait. It's actually a little bit longer than I thought it might take. The documentation on it, I think, says it could take up to 10 minutes, but that would be more typical in a scenario where you have a lot of traffic probably on your CDN and you've already had it pushed out to a lot of endpoints, or to all of the edge nodes on the CDN. Whereas I'm fairly confident I'm the only person that's hitting that app right now, so it shouldn't be getting a lot of load. If you're watching today, be great if you subscribe. You can follow me on Twitch or on YouTube. So on Twitch, it's Dave Paquette, and over on YouTube, it's Asp.Net Monsters. Over on the Asp.Net Monsters, we do weekly videos. And hey, we're live now. It shows us on the page. But we do weekly videos talking about web development in Asp.Net, in .NET in general, and JavaScript, and we even talk about a lot of random things. It's just development in general sometimes. We talk about SQL. We've even had episode or two on PHP. So it just depends what we're working on and what's interesting to us in the moment. We tend to do short videos, approximately 15 minutes in length, where we can cover a topic that is relevant to us at that time. So, do I need to keep stalling here, or wow, this is taking a really long time. I would love to go to bed soon, so I'm hoping that this will finish. Succeeded. Okay. Fingers crossed here, because if this didn't work, then probably not gonna be able to fix it tonight. That still failed, didn't it? Yeah, it's still doing undefined there, so the writing out of that file just is not working for us the way we expected it to. That's disappointing. Okay, well, we almost got there, but we didn't quite get there, so let's call it a night, and we will try to tackle that little part of it next time. Hoping to do these semi-regularly, but it just kind of depends on my work and family schedule when I can fit it in. So it's not going to be like at the same time every week or anything like that, but I do hope to see you soon.